The Democrats unleash a socialist house of horrors on the unwitting American voters. Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. And today we will pick through the rubble of the Democrats' first round of self-immolation in two debates this week, which unofficially kicked off the campaign season, which will conclude some 16 months from now. It featured a frightening look at what America would look like as a socialist nation. We'll play you the good, not much, the bad, most everything, and the ugly, lots of that too, of the 4 grueling hours of groveling and pandering and embrace of easily the most radical ideas ever proposed in a race for the White House. LibertyNation.com national correspondent Joe Schaefer will join in on the analysis, and LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza will jump on board to analyze a bunch of big Supreme Court decisions, one of which has rekindled the anger of conservatives against Chief Justice John Roberts.
But where are the clowns? Send in the clowns.
Yes, Virginia, those 20 people rolled out by the ever more radical Democratic Party this week actually want to become President of the United States. 20 flavors of socialism on display for all the world to see in debates on back-to-back nights in Miami. And about this time, Donald Trump's political advisors are likely begging the president to follow the time-tested truism first uttered by Napoleon of all people: never interfere with an enemy while he's in the process of destroying himself. Not that Trump will listen to that advice. Nevertheless, could the rogues gallery of 20 Democratic presidential candidates on display in the first ever primary debates over 2 nights in Miami this week have possibly been more craven? Have you ever witnessed such gross brown-nosing to an extreme fringe of the American electorate? What lunatic idea will they come up with next? Wait, I've got it. To commemorate America's immersion into the new unofficial language of the Democratic Party unveiled in these debates, how about a bill to make Spanish the national language? Anyway, unable to let this moment pass, and in honor of this historic plunge into the horrors of what a socialist America would actually look like, we've decided to bestow some very special awards upon the debate participants. So here goes, in no particular order. Biggest flop. Now, this is not a hard choice. Young Beto, don't call me Robert Francis, O'Rourke had millennials and progressives swooning after his near miss against Ted Cruz in the 2018 Texas Senate race. But in the first debate, he looked distinctly not ready for prime time. He lacked any semblance of energy. He appeared drawn and pale and unshaven and spouted a string of hackneyed cliches. And he got bullied by the guy at the far end of the stage, Bill de Blasio, in a fight about health care.
Would you replace private insurance?
No, I think the choice is fundamental to our ability to get everybody cared for.
Private insurance is not working for tens of millions of Americans. When you talk about the co-pays, the deductibles, the premiums, the out-of-pocket expenses, it's not working.
That's right.
So for those for whom
it's not working, they can choose Medicare. For the culinary workers in Nevada who I listen to, who negotiated for those plans, they're able to keep them.
Why are you defending private insurance?
On the other hand, Beto did display some of the Democrats' newfound embrace of Spanglish.
What would your top individual rate be?
This economy has got to work for everyone. And right now we know that it isn't. And it's going to take all of us coming together to make sure that it does. Necesitamos incluir cada persona en el éxito de esta economía.
Not to be outdone, Spartacus, Cory Booker, and the Open Borders radical Julian Castro followed on with their own Spanglish riffs. Now, most inexplicable statement, that award That's tough. If we had to reconstruct every inexplicable policy statement made over those 2 nights, it'd take hours on end. Instead, we offer this. When asked what would be his very first priority when he assumes the presidency on January 20th, 2021, Joe Biden replied, to defeat Donald Trump. Excuse me, Mr. Vice President, but you would have already accomplished that by then because, oh, never mind. If he didn't get that, then my explaining it isn't going to change anything. All right, how about the biggest surprise? The biggest surprise of the debates, this is a group award. The second debate kicked off with all 3 frontrunners in the race vowing to raise taxes.
Yes, they will pay more in taxes, but less in health care for what they get.
I would be going about eliminating Donald Trump's tax cuts for the wealthy.
On day one, I will repeal that tax bill that benefits the top 1% and the biggest corporations of America.
But there were not just calls for raising taxes, but adding new ones. Here's former tech entrepreneur Andrew Yang, who wants to hand everyone over 18 $1,000 a month and pay for it with a new European-style tax. And the whole scheme was pretty much ridiculed by moderator Jose Diaz-Balart.
So you're saying $1,000 a month for everyone over 18, but a value-added tax, so you can spend that $1,000 on value-added tax?
Well, the value-added tax would end up, you'd still be increasing the buying power of the bottom 94% of Americans.
Right. There's the Democrats' logic. We'll double the federal budget to pay for a massive giveaway and create a new tax to pay for it that would in turn be paid by the people getting the $1,000 a month. Did you follow that? You know, for time immemorial, it was just understood that you should never promise to raise taxes because it would amount to certain defeat. Exhibit A would be Walter Mondale, who made just that kind of promise in 1984 to raise taxes and lost 49 out of 50 states. Okay, who gets the honor for the most socialist candidate? Now, this is the hardest choice of all, given that every one of the 20 candidates on stage has openly voiced support for undiluted socialist policies such as the Green New Deal and Medicare for All. So you have to give the award to the candidate who seems most committed in his gut to full-on collectivism. Thus, the winner would have to be Bernie Sanders, whose perpetual rage against the machine does ooze authenticity.
We will have Medicare for all when tens of millions of people are prepared to stand up and tell the insurance companies and the drug companies that their day is gone, that health care is a human right, not something to make huge profits off of.
Oh, yeah, there's a real socialist. After all, how much more committed to socialism could you be than spending your honeymoon in the Soviet Union, as Sanders and his lovely wife, Jane, did? Who is the most moderate candidate? Boy, there's an extremely low bar for this award. It would be Joe Biden by default, simply on the basis of defending the current, though admittedly troubled, healthcare system and promising to oppose any candidate trying to replace it, as all the rest of the candidates do in one form or another. So unlike the other frontrunners, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, at least Biden won't try to confiscate private health insurance from 180 million Americans. The most humorous line of the debates, now this is another extremely low bar because there were all of about maybe 3 humorous lines delivered over 4 grueling hours by the dour, perpetually pandering field of candidates. None were exactly side splitters, and only one was actually intentional. So the winner is Senator Amy Klobuchar, who tweaked Trump.
This president is literally every single day 10 minutes away from going to war
one tweet away from going to war, and I don't think we should conduct foreign policy in our bathrobe at 5 in the morning.
The runner-up for the most humorous line would be Pete Buttigieg saying his foreign policy is kind of hard to predict because, quote, we have no idea which of our most important allies Trump will have pissed off worst between now and then. The biggest truth teller. Well, that would be a three-way tie between Tim Ryan, John Delaney, and John Hickenlooper, one current member of Congress, one former member, and a former governor. These three warned their fellow debaters of what will happen in the next election if they continue on their current path.
We could talk about climate, we could talk about guns, we could talk about all of these issues that we all care about. We have a perception problem with the Democratic Party. We are not connecting to the working class people in the very states that I represent, in Ohio, in the industrial Midwest. We've lost all connection. That we have got to change the center of gravity of the Democratic Party from being coastal, elitist, and Ivy League, which is the perception, to somebody from the forgotten communities that have been left behind for the last 30 years.
All the big transformative things we've ever done in this country's history have happened when huge majorities of the American people get behind them, which is why we need real solutions, not impossible promises.
If we turn towards socialism, we run the risk of helping to reelect the worst president in American history.
Forewarned is forearmed. Okay, we'll continue handing out awards for this two-day socialist love-in or hate-in, whatever, a bit later on, and we got some doozies, some hidden gems, so don't you dare turn away. But first, a quick break, and then we're back with analysis of the debates with LibertyNation.com national correspondent Joe Schaefer.
Exhausted by all the fake news? On LibertyNation.com's YouTube channel, facts and fresh, bold analysis are what you get without the leftist spin. Subscribe today to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel because
truth
is
making
a comeback.
Okay, time to continue announcing our awards for the participants in the Democratic debates this week. Let's pick up with the most frightening candidate. Now, this is a very, very high bar, but I would submit Julian Castro, the open borders activist and social justice warrior on the rampage, who went beyond just being radically pro-abortion in introducing a new phrase to the Democrats' socialist lexicon.
Would your plan cover abortion, Mr. Secretary?
Yes, it would. I don't believe only in reproductive freedom. I believe in reproductive justice. And, what that means is that just because a woman, or let's also not forget, someone in the trans community, a trans female, is poor, doesn't mean they shouldn't have the right to exercise that right to choose.
Reproductive justice. Right. He actually said that. Did you hear that? That a transgender, a male changing to a female, should have the right to choose an abortion at taxpayer expense. Fortunately, of course, we know something that Castro apparently doesn't, that you can't actually have a baby if you were born a male. So we'll be spared, at least, having to pay for transgender abortions, thank goodness. And no statement better reflects the utter insanity of this party. But you gotta hand it to Castro. He managed to come up with an insane proposal that no other Democrat had thought of yet.
We need a Marshall Plan for Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador, so that people can find safety and opportunity at home instead of coming to the United States to seek it.
Funded, I'm sure, by those obscenely wealthy Americans who make too much money. And that brings up perhaps the single most frightening statement of the night, not that it's anything new for Bill de Blasio.
You hear folks say there's not enough money. What I say to them every single time is there's plenty of money in this world. There's plenty of money in this country. It's just in the wrong hands.
There you go. President de Blasio will decide in whose hands the money should rightly be. And it's not like most of the other candidates feel a whole lot differently. But intent on not being outflanked to his left, Senator Spartacus Cory Booker drew a fine point on his social justice agenda, raising the specter of something associated with like the 1950s. And don't forget those black trannies.
Civil rights is some place to begin, but in the African American civil rights community, another place to focus on was to stop the lynching of African Americans. We do not talk enough about trans Americans, especially African American trans Americans.
Lynching black transgenders. Okay? But then Spartacus admitted that he wants to round up all the guns because he doesn't like them.
The reason we have a problem right now is we've let the corporate gun lobby frame this debate. It is time that we have bold actions and a bold agenda. I will get that done as President of the United States because this is not about policy. This is personal.
Right. Let's ignore a basic constitutional right because Spartacus doesn't personally like guns. Okay, who is the most likable candidate? Who gets the award for most likable? Well, agree with his policies or not, there was an air of earnestness about Pete Buttigieg, and he was perhaps the only candidate who based his answers on logic instead of wild emotion, preferring the patient explanation to the hysterical rants of the likes of Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. The least likable candidate, that's a tie between New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio and California Congressman Eric Swalwell. De Blasio was a Trump knockoff, a caricature of the typical loud, rude, bombastic New Yorker picking fights wherever he could find them. Swalwell acted the part of that kid in grammar school you couldn't stand because he was always bragging, sucking up to the teacher, and providing a stream of unwanted advice. And Swalwell is also the winner of the next prize, which I admit we made up just for him. And that would be the biggest punk. The remarkably self-satisfied Congressman Swalwell lectured Pete Buttigieg about the mayor's improper response to a recent police shooting in his town and provided instructions on how Buttigieg should run his town, drawing a lingering, icy stare from the normally unflappable Mayor Pete. But wait, that's not all. Swalwell basically told Joe Biden to pack it in because he's too old. So get off the stage, old man.
I was 6 years old when a presidential candidate came to the California Democratic Convention and said, it's time to pass the torch to a new generation of Americans. That candidate was then Senator Joe Biden. Joe Biden was right when he said it was time to pass the torch to a new generation of Americans 32 years ago. He's still right today. If we're going to solve the issues of automation, pass the torch. If we're going to solve the issues of climate chaos, pass the torch. If we're going to solve the issue of student loan debt, pass the torch.
I thought ageism wasn't allowed in the Democratic Party. Okay, so who wins the award for most likely to succeed? Well, given Joe Biden's ever more geriatric countenance and appeal to the past instead of the future, Bernie Sanders' scary diatribes against anyone who wears a suit, and the utter ineptitude of most of the other candidates, Kamala Harris would have to get the nod. Yes, she is among the most radical of a hard left field, an outspoken supporter of the catastrophic Green New Deal, Medicare for all, and aggressive gun control measures, among other things. But she did come on strong, exuding energy, drive, and passion. She was a model of the contemporary socialist woman. And her signature moment was attacking Joe Biden for buddying up to racist Senate colleagues back in the day. And like everything with these candidates, it was personal.
Growing up, my sister and I had to deal with the neighbor who told us her parents couldn't play with us because we were black. I'm going to now direct this at Vice President Biden. I do not believe you are a racist, but I also believe, and it's personal, and I was actually it was hurtful to hear you talk about the reputations of two United States senators who built their reputations and career on the segregation of race in this country. You also worked with them to oppose busing. And, you know, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. And she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
So that went viral, and Kamala was declared the winner of these debates and now becomes the flavor of the month, or perhaps longer than that. The least likely to succeed, well, there's a tendency to pick a candidate like Senator Michael Bennet from Colorado, dull as dishwater, or Andrew Yang, who didn't see fit to even wear a tie, or former Maryland Congressman John Delaney, who was interrupted so many times when he started speaking that he might be developing an inferiority complex. But the winner really would have to be the loopy New Age author and guru Marianne Williamson, who was asked about the first thing she would do as president.
And Ms. Williamson with the last word.
My first call is to Prime Minister of New Zealand, who said that her goal is to make New Zealand the place where it's the best place in the world for a child to grow up. And I will tell her girlfriend you are so on, because the United States of America is going to be the best place in the world for a child to grow up. Mr. President, if you're listening, I want you to hear me, please. You have harnessed fear for political purposes, and only love can cast that out. I'm going to harness love for political purposes. I will meet you on that field, and sir, love will win.
Our final award is for the biggest Trump hater. Now, this is an extremely high bar because the field is ripe with contenders for this most cherished of awards. We're going to call it a tie between the outspoken senators from California and Vermont. Kamala Harris wailed like a banshee about the evil chief executive, lifting the Trump is Hitler audience to its feet and likely propelling her into a hate Trump tour coming soon to a voting district near you. But old Bernie was not to be outdone.
Trump is a pathological liar and a racist, and that he lied to the American people during his campaign. He said he was going to stand up for working families. Well, President Trump, you're not standing up for working families when you try to throw 32 million people off the health care that they have, and that 83% of your tax benefits go to the top 1%. That's how we beat Trump. We expose him for the fraud that he is.
And so the band will undoubtedly play on with an almost endless string of Trump hate fests and glorification of government uber alles. The next debates are on the last 2 days of July. Quick break, and then we're back to discuss another consequential week for the Supreme Court and reigniting the anger of conservatives at Chief Justice John Roberts.